Filip Gustavsson said no to arbitration as him and the Minnesota Wild come to an agreement on a 3-year extension. We'll break down all of the aspects of this deal, including the year-by-year breakdown, which may lead to another question that has to be asked on today's episode of Locked on Wild.
You're Locked on Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is happening, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Locked on Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. If this is your first time tuning in, make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week, especially when breaking news happens. If you are an everydayer who tunes in each and every day of the week, we're glad to have you back. Got a lot in store coming up for the next 2 months that we'll tell you a little bit more about coming up later. On today's episode of Locked on Wild, all about the Filip Gustavsson extension, a 3-year deal to stay with the Minnesota Wild. We'll break down the year-by-year cap hits and what this means for the goalie tandem going forward. Plus, does this mean the Wild are going to be getting rid of somebody before the start of the season to free up some cap space? We'll consider that possibility today, too. My name is Seth Topal, your daily Minnesota Wild insider, joined, as we always are, on Mondays by Alex Micheletti. And I don't know what it is lately, but it seems like it's either been breaking news on Sundays, breaking news on Mondays, and this week is no extension. Alex, no arbitration for the Wild. Filip Gustavsson has agreed to a 3-year deal, $11.25 million, and an average annual value of $3.75 million. So before we dive into the particulars, what do you think about the new deal for Gus Bus?
Yeah, this is huge. Thank you, Bill Guerin, for breaking news again on a Sunday/Monday. We appreciate it for the podcast. Huge to avoid arbitration. You know, that can always be nasty. And we saw earlier in the morning, Troy Terry valued himself at $8 million, and the team, the Ducks, had him at half that. So yeah, it's nice to avoid that. And they also get an extra year out of it too, because in arbitration they wouldn't be able to get 3 years. So huge for that. And like I mentioned on Twitter too, it kind of bridges the gap, to get Wallstead cooking to be eventually the 1A starter, or full-time starter. So yeah, this works out for both sides, and good number for Gustafsson. I'm sure he's pumped to get a little bit more than Samsonov too. So yeah, big.
Yeah, it works well on all sides. And I think what it also does, and we had talked about this a few weeks ago, in getting that 3rd year for the Wild, that allows them next season, the first year that deal kicks in, that'll be, you would expect, when Wallstead is up as the backup /1B. So you get that season to see what Jesper's got, see where he fits in. If he ends up being the legit guy, he's going to be that guy. If you see enough from him, you have the next season, and you have the season after that. If you decide, we've got 2 starters here, and it makes the most sense to go fill a need by trading one of these guys. And that's not to say that let's say Gustavsson continues on the role that he's on. He could end up being the starter as well. And so the Wild give themselves options or how to handle this as this contract unfolds. If Wallstead pans out the way they hope he does, he's your starter. If something happens, you've got Gustavsson locked in, and you have possibilities of what to do. And it's the AAV is not that huge for goalies. I mean, Cam Talbot was getting right around 3 when he was here. Mm-hmm. Marc-Andre Fleury is getting 3.5. So it's a pretty, I think, reasonable offer for the Wild that keeps Gustavsson here.
Yeah, it's huge. Yeah, like you mentioned, I mean, you see some of the goalie contracts. It's a lot higher than that. So they got him at a fair price, and I'm I'm sure he would want even more. But this, he seems like he is really comfortable here, and they can start that Swedish tandem here next season. And and like you mentioned too, I mean, Wallstead, he's not even 21 years old yet. So, I mean, this allows Gus to be the main guy for a bit here. And like you said, one of them could, eventually be trade bait, which is huge. And, who knows with the cap, it's obviously, fingers crossed, going to continue to go up and up. And be very interesting.
Now, the most fascinating part about this is the year-by-year breakdown for the cap hits, which, thank you to Puckpedia for putting this together. Year one's cap hit is $4.25 million. Year two is $4 million, and year three is $3 million. So you're even going at a lesser hit for that first year in which pretty much all the money is available to use. Although, as we'll talk about a little more in depth, $4.25 million this season, that plus Kalen Addison when he accepts the qualifying offer, which is around $700K, that's pretty much all the money that's left. And so there wasn't a ton of wiggle room to begin with. There's less now, which leads you to believe that that's not going to be the number that the Wild are at when the season starts. There's probably something else that's going to happen.
Yeah, so as of right now, they have a little over 1.6 million in cap space. So it's very, very, very tight. I'm sure they would love to move John Merrill if they possibly could. But like we've talked about in so many numerous episodes, the other teams see the tape.
Right.
You can't pull a Houdini act on many teams. So ideally, they would love to move Merrill or Goligoski, but Goligoski's a lot harder to move because you have to ask him, and so yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if there's many other forwards that they could possibly move. Maybe closer to the deadline, depending on how the season is going. You could try to see if you could move Foligno, because the type of the way he plays is playoff hockey, and you want that grit, and he'd be ideal for teams looking for a guy like that can help grind down teams. So yeah, a name to keep an eye on way later, but still time to figure out what they're going to do.
Most definitely. And we'll talk a little bit more about that to finish up the show, because I have a theory as to kind of why we haven't seen some of this happen yet. It's a great deal for Gus, great deal for the Wilds. Hard to not pull a lot of positives from this. I mean, I suppose you could look at it maybe as people will look at it as an overpay potentially. But again, like we talked about, with Marc-Andre Fleury getting 3.5 and some of the other goalies throughout the league, Aiden Hill getting 4.9, Gustafsson's better than Aiden Hill. I'm sorry.
Yes, 100%.
So
yeah.
It is below market value. That's really the only way to look at this. So
and just one more thing too, like we mentioned a little bit ago too on the episode. I mean, Wallsted's only 20. You don't see a lot of starting goalies in this league that young. Right. So, even though Gus has only done it for 1 year, what else are you going to do? I mean, yeah. I would rather take Gustafsson right now over, whatever is left in the pile of, backup goalies. Otherwise, then you're stuck with, I know this guy just retired, but you have like Thomas Greiss or Yaroslav Halak. No, thank you. I'd rather take the shot at a Gustafsson for 3 years, even though he's only proven it one time. He's shown in this small sample size that that he's legit, and I think he's just going to continue on the way he played.
Most definitely. We're talking a lot about contracts today because The Athletic had another piece that they did looking at the teams that have been most efficient with using their cap. And so we'll discuss that. Should be spicy as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Take your first swing at betting Major League Baseball on FanDuel, and you can get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets, up to $200. That's right, just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to hit the first home run. Unfortunately, Twins fans, if you've been paying attention lately, things haven't been going great. And so you are probably finding your best value in betting on the opponent of the Twins each time they take the field. Whoever you end up betting on, you can do so on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on Major League Baseball than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. Continuing today's episode of Locked On Wild, once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day for the everydayers. Locked On Wild Boot Camp starts tomorrow, so make sure you stay tuned as we get you ready fully for the start of the season with 2 months jam-packed of looks at everything you need to know for the 2023-2024 season. That's all starting tomorrow here on Locked On Wild. Continuing our chat with Alex Micheletti today. Alex, The Athletic took a look at every team in the NHL and looked at contract efficiency, just trying to find which teams are best at finding value contracts and getting the most out of the deals that they sign their players to. I will tell you, the Minnesota Wild ended up in the top 10. And so here's a top 10 before we focus in on the Wild specifically. Florida Panthers came in at number 1. That Matthew Tkachuk deal is preposterous. The amount of surplus value that Tkachuk is expected to generate over the course of the contract is $49.7 million. So just sit on that one for a second. Carolina Hurricanes, number 2. Colorado Avalanche, number 3. Boston Bruins, number 4. New Jersey Devils, number 5. And your Minnesota Wild, number 6. And so, obviously, the Wild have been dealing with the cap hits of Zach Parise and Ryan Suter, and will this season and next as well. But beyond that, the models that The Athletic uses project a ton of surplus value for Matt Boldy at $31.1 million over the course of his contract. Eriksson Ek, $20.5 million of surplus value over the course of his deal. Kirill Kaprizov, $12.6 million of surplus value over the course of his deal. And so that just goes to show you that has been kind of the tendency of this team, is to try to lock players in as they see their value start to rise, so that, yes, you're paying more on the front end, but you're also paying way less when players get into what is considered the peak of their career.
Yeah, they're hitting on these deals, and it's setting up for perfect timing in a couple of years when the buyouts are done. It's a giant, big time free agency class in a couple of years too. So, they're setting themselves up well to, try to get a superstar. It might be preposterous to think that they would come here to the Wild. But you at least have to throw your name in the mix, and show these teams, hey, we have a ton of ton of money now, and you'll be playing with a Kirill Kaprizov, a Matt Boldy. That is, I think a lot of players would love to play with those guys. So, Bill Guerin is taking a lot of heat for the buyouts, but they did it for a reason. They had to do it. There was just no way that this team was going to continue to function very well with Zach and Ryan. We heard all the stories about in the locker room, how big of a mess it was. And, now they have, their younger guys stepping up in leadership roles, and it's huge.
And as was brought up in the comments last week, and this is a really good point, is that the Parise Suter era, that stuff that was going on behind the scenes, there was nobody really in a position to squelch it right away.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was just allowed to continue. And so that's kind of how this spiraled so far out of control. And I don't know if you heard, but Russo mentioned what the penalty would have been for the cap recapture had Zach Parise retired this season or next. Be like $9 million, or actually it was last season or this season. Last year it would have been $9 million immediately. Like right now, you got to find $9 million to free up. This year it would have been 19 million in terms of cap recapture penalties. And so that's not something you have factored in. That's something that you have to come up with off the top. And so while those have been just sitting in the ether, that money has just been sitting there collecting dust, unusable. You have all these contracts, and yes, not all of them have been hits, but you look at, for instance, Freddie Gaudreau. His contract right now is what is the kind of expected value for a guy like that, $2.1 million. Marcus Johansson is generating $1.5 million in surplus value over the course of his deal. Ryan Hartman, $3.7 million. And even guys like Jonas Brodin and Jared Spurgeon, who we look at those contracts and we're like, geez, those are a little on the pricey end. Well, they're performing at what is considered like that rate. So those contracts essentially are just even right now. And if you want to look at some, John Merrill, for instance, that's one that's generating lower than that value. And so, okay, yeah, the John Merrill contract is bad. Like if that ends up being one of the big misses by Bill Guerin over the course of these contracts, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I mean, if those other, I mean, especially. We've talked about this guy a couple times, in previous episodes. Marcus Johansson. I mean, he's one of the biggest, because he is going to be on the line with Matt Boldy, who you just gave a giant deal to, and you're hoping that chemistry continues. And getting Marcus Johansson was huge at the deadline, because he wasn't on the team at the beginning of the year, and then when he was with Matt Boldy, Boldy kind of really had a terrific stretch there with them together. And so you're hoping that it continues here going forward.
And they mentioned as well that if you take out the dead cap money, the $14.7 million in dead cap, the Wild would be in first on this list, because those top four guys that you mentioned are generating, Boldy, Eriksson Ek, Kaprizov, and Hartman. They're generating, ironically enough, about $15 million of extra value per season. So it's funny how that money just all seems to even out. And so it is interesting to look at these types of contracts like Gustavsson gets and say, okay, you factor that in considering previous contracts that have been signed by Wild players, and there is an expectation that guys exceed their value, and that's where you make your money. So it's interesting to look at all these as they play out. But as we started to discuss, I feel like something else is coming. Somebody is going to be moved because there really is no wiggle room. And we know at the course of an NHL season, not everything goes according to plan. So we'll finish today's episode by taking a look at what could be done to free up potential money for during the season. That's on the way as we finish today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. For the everydayers, get ready for Locked On Wild Boot Camp starting tomorrow, as we'll get you fully ready for the start of the 2023-2024 season with a look at everything that could factor in to how the Wild do either win or lose throughout the year. Alex, I feel like somebody is going to get moved because we talked about the Filip Gustavsson contract. The first year cap hit $4.25 million. You add Kalen Addison's qualifying offer to that, which is like 720. It's 720 something thousand. It's right down to the dollar amount. So you add that to it, and you're right at about $5 million between those two guys. And what the Wild have left for cap room to navigate through the season for injury and what have you, it's not a lot. But I think this is where we see the benefit of having Iowa, the farm system, so close, is the NHL salary cap is weird. Let's just say that. We may see that this team doesn't oftentimes carry a 13th forward just so that they can accumulate some cap during the course of the season. And then if they need somebody to come up and fill in for somebody that's injured, that then is where you see them call somebody up to come and step in.
Yeah, and you also have the Marco conundrum, Rossi. How long of a leash is Dean going to have with him? Because if he struggles again, are they sending him to Iowa? And then, are you calling up a Sammy Walker? Or it's going to be between Sammy, Vinny, Lettieri, and an Adam Beckman. So those three are right on the edge, hoping for a chance. And so, yeah, it's they're cutting it really, really, really close. If an injury happens right away.
And it depends entirely on how this season goes, because if this team ends up being in the hunt for a wild card spot or in that top three in the division, you're probably not going to have the ability to add anything at the deadline.
No.
For one, so put that out into the internet. If things don't go according to plan, you've got guys on the last year of their deal such as Matt Zuccarello, Marcus Foligno, Ryan Hartman. But let's be real about where those guys would most accurately slot into a lineup. If you're a team like, let's just throw the Boston Bruins out there, they're probably not going to be as good this year as they were last year, but they should probably still be a playoff team. If it gets to the deadline and they're looking for somebody to fill in their bottom six, that'd be a spot for, say, Marcus Foligno, Ryan Hartman as well. I still feel like Zuccarello is a top six guy, maybe not a top line guy. But if you're looking at a postseason team, these guys just fall a lot lower in the pecking order because of how they're built already. And so it's going to be tricky, I think, to get substance value back if you deal some of these guys when we hit the trade deadline, if this season doesn't go according to plan.
Yeah, even if it does go according to plan, they might still move a guy. It's like the Twins right now; they're in first place, but they might move Kenta Maeda or Sonny Gray. So it might be that type of situation too, where the Wild, because those guys are in a in their last year deal, and they might not re-sign them. That they might try a hockey trade where they try to get a younger player, but
Sure.
It's still NHL level. Or, want to, again, kind of like a Vinny Lettieri, who's a tweener, where they could play in the NHL or AHL, depending on the situation. So you might see something like that, even if they're still in the hunt. If they can find somebody that could help contribute in the playoffs, I think Bill Guerin would do that type of hockey trade.
I'm going to put it at a 0% chance, and it can't be absolute zero because nothing is absolute zero. Slim to none, under a 1% chance that Marc-Andre Fleury is moved or Alex Goligoski, because those guys are at the end of the line, and they value, I think, more fit than like uprooting and going to somebody during a playoff push to try to help out that way. So I don't think those guys end up getting moved, which then leads to those other three, or as we've discussed, and it seems like his name has been brought up a ton, John Merrill. Yeah. Let's not forget, it was last season on August 31st that Bill Guerin traded Dmitry Kulikov to the Anaheim Ducks for a thank you note, essentially. So it is still possible to make trades. It's down to a very small number of players that actually could get moved. And so I feel like this team could benefit from having a couple $1 million additional to navigate through some dicey injury situations. And so I guess we'll wait and see, but that's just kind of my hunch as to how this plays out.
Yeah, and we always make jokes about this, but the Wild, for whatever reason, just they're a team that never has an LTIR type of situation, which would really help the Wild's cap situation, but they've never had to go that route, which is very, very interesting.
Yeah, it's not something that they've used to the degree that the Tampa Bay Lightning have made it famous for. So we'll see how it plays out, but what we do know is Filip Gustavsson is here for the next 3 seasons. Should also mention, we didn't get to this. 5-team no trade for Gustavsson in the final year of his deal, which is a little bit of relief in that area, but that also tells you that the Wild are thinking a similar thing, is to, if one of these guys ends up being the legit guy, both of them will not be here by the end of the contract. So just some food for thoughts for that. But that will do it for today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, if this is your first time tuning in to Locked On Wild, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. And we hope that you subscribe and stick with us through the rest of the off season. For the everydayers, we will see you bright and early tomorrow for boot camp as we get started gearing up for the 2023-2024 season. So make sure that you turn notifications on so you don't miss out on any new content throughout the course of the week and the rest of the offseason. We have new episodes all week long as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.